Hi, I'm Jess Billy, and welcome to Comic Book Corner. In the 1960s, Marvel wanted to become the #1 comic book publisher in the country. Believe it or not, there was a time when they weren't even in the top 5. One of the tricks that writer and editor Stan Lee came up with to accomplish this was to create heroes who were a little rougher around the edges than their competition over at DC. Which makes zero sense because if you went by sales figures for 1962, these guys were #1. But that's a video for another time. Spider-Man wasn't the first of these new types of heroes, but he sure epitomized it. He had real problems. On occasion he would do something a little questionable to get the job done, and still meet his responsibilities as Peter Parker. Or he'd ignore either Spider-Man or Peter's problems and deal with the stuff he could actually handle. Not only that, but over time, many of Marvel's villains became less mustache-twirling caricatures and started having a little more depth. Their motives became something readers could relate to. They were as sympathetic as the comics code would allow. Something else that was a rarity in the 60s was you had supporting casts who would walk a very thin line. Most of these would be characters like Spider-Man's friend, Dr. Kirk Connors. Connors would have uncontrollable spurts where he became the Lizard. It's a tragedy, and I don't think you can blame Connors for the Lizard's actions. Again, story for another time. Then you have one of the greatest threats to Spider-Man hiding in plain sight. He's a guy who was commissioned the creation of at least 2 supervillains. He's the one who has accused Spider-Man of an insane number of crimes without any evidence on dozens of occasions. But who is this dastardly soul? Wilson Fisk the Kingpin? Dr. Octopus? Norman Osborn? Nope, I hate to break it to you, it's Jonah Jameson. How can this be? Is Jameson really a supervillain? We're gonna find out because today Comic Book Corner asks, Jameson, threat or menace? I hate to ruin my own clickbaity title card, but the answer is no, he's not. When we first meet J. Jonah Jameson in Amazing Spider-Man #1, he's sort of a P.T. Barnum-style showman. His son happens to be an astronaut. There was an accident during landing and Spider-Man saves the day. He hates Spider-Man because he upstaged his son. Then in issue 10, the story changed a bit. By that point, Jameson has seen Spider-Man in action enough times to know what type of person he must be under that mask. That's why he hates Spider-Man. He's a good person. Jameson doesn't think he could ever be that good. Or if fate had given him or anyone else he knows those same powers, that they would have ended up anything like that. With a motivation like that, you can't say J. Jonah Jameson is a good man. He's greedy, angry, and incredibly petty. Plus, look at the way he treats his own son. From the time of that first failed space mission up until his return from the microverse. Jameson is a really shitty father. Plus, by all accounts, he gets so caught up in work, a profession that seems to consist of hating Spider-Man 90% of the time, that he often forgets he's even married. So, at best, he is a mediocre husband. That doesn't mean he's evil. Jameson is probably right about what he'd be like with superpowers. You might think he was right about all his friends, too. I mean, the first person that he called his best friend was Norman Osborn. We saw what he was like with superpowers. But another good friend of his was George Stacy. Captain Stacy was a good cop. He ran things by the book. Not the book most cities actually use. Captain Stacy wouldn't pick up a gun and shoot anybody unless he was attacked first. Even a suspected criminal like this guy. He used the book cities are supposed to be using. In the Marvel Universe, superpowers don't change who you are. If anything, they make you like yourself, only more so. People like the Lizard and the Hulk are the exception, not the rule. Given what little we saw of the man, it's a safe bet that if George Stacy had gotten superpowers, he wouldn't have been any different with them than he was without them. He'd find a way to use them on the job to catch bad guys. The first person to pin a medal on him would be, get this, J. Jonah Jameson. Another off-cited reason for why Jameson doesn't like old Webhead is that no one knows who he is and he's answerable to no one. At least in the comics, Jameson doesn't have much of a problem with other superheroes. If Captain America walked up to him, he'd salute. Depending on the point in time, he might not know who Captain America is, but he'd know that the FBI, Army Intelligence, and S.H.I.E.L.D. did. So if Cap were to do something wrong, he'd have to deal with some major oversight. But this extends to superheroes who don't have an official sanction. He's only had occasional disagreements with the Fantastic Four, but their identities are public. They have a large building in the center of town. Their phone number is available through simple Google search, so if they did something awful, they aren't getting away scot-free. Superheroes who operate in secret and don't answer to the public they claim to serve make him feel uncomfortable. But imagine it was real, which for him it is. If a small portion of the population could throw cars, shoot laser eyes, or read and control minds, you would have to wonder what else they were actually capable of. So an intelligent person would have every right to be afraid. With Spider-Man, we the readers know this fear is unfounded. Jameson has no way of knowing that, and neither does anyone else. There isn't any evidence that Spider-Man is even one guy. In point of fact, sometimes it's pretty clear that he's not. So even if Jameson could accept one Spider-Man was good, there's no way he could possibly say that about all of them. Given all that, you would think J. Jonah Jameson had a problem with mutants. You'd be right, and you'd be wrong. If you look at the Daily Bugle essay from Uncanny X-Men #1, you'd see he's very anti-mutant. But that changed pretty quick. By 1965, he no longer believed all mutants were bad. It's just like most people, Jameson was only familiar with mutants like Magneto, who destroyed cities on a weekly basis, or the X-Men who caused just as much property damage, taking the law into their own hands. And there's that phrase again. It is doubtful Jameson knew your run-of-the-mill mutant even existed. At that point in time, most mutants hadn't done anything newsworthy. They were your friends, your neighbors, your teachers. Your crush from high school that you've never forgiven yourself for not asking out. Somehow Jameson realized this, and I guess he reasoned that having superpowers isn't a problem. Using them isn't a problem. Using them to do something you don't have legal authority to do borders on might makes right. Even if well-intentioned, there is too much potential for abuse. I read a lot of Jameson appearances in order to prepare for this video. As far as I can tell, no in-story explanation for this change was ever given. Seeing how mind-alteration happy Charles Xavier was in those early days, maybe Jameson got a dose of the whammy. I know the out-of-story logic behind it. In the late 1960s, Stan Lee had written an issue of Amazing Spider-Man where Jameson was marching for civil rights. Peter was surprised by this because Jameson is not exactly a spring chicken. Peter, your ageism is showing. The X-Men was always a metaphor for the civil rights movement. While in the real world you can have someone who is racist against one group but not another, in fiction, simpler is often better. So you couldn't have Jameson marching with MLK while at the same time rallying against his metaphorical counterpart, Charles Xavier. Of course, he did hire X-Factor to catch Spider-Man at one point. This was during that period where the original X-Men were pretending to be mutant hunters, so that people would basically be paying them to recruit the next generation of mutant heroes. I talked about that in an earlier episode. This story always seemed a little off to me. In a rare Jameson appearance outside of the Spider books, they made a big deal about how he came out against the Mutant Registration Act. But it wasn't because he didn't see the potential for the mutants, he did. I say this without a bit of irony, but he's not one for arresting people before they commit a crime. Right, Jonah, we believe you. Another problem he had is that most people don't know they're mutants until they're teens. While most of the ones people know about have radical differences from the human norm, most of them have powers that are insignificant and they might not even know they have. Yeah, it turns out most mutants were more like Doug Ramsey, who could translate any language, not Apocalypse or Magneto. These people's crime isn't something that they did, or have any sort of control over. Their crime is being alive. Regardless of species, they're still sentient beings and American citizens. They have rights that should be respected as long as they aren't harming anyone else. Contrary to how he was portrayed in Marvel's Civil War, J. Jonah Jameson is not the hawkish Bush-Cheney-style neocon. Far from it. He's a center-left Clinton or Biden school Democrat. Which I know if you're a conservative means he's evil for being too liberal. But if you're like me, that's still a mark on the evil side because he's not liberal enough. Here is another prime example of Jonah not being a complete dick. He is a surprisingly good boss. Yeah, he's got that rough exterior, but in the end, he's a softie. When Peter jokes about this in the Stan Lee run, it is meant to be sarcastic. However, it turns out to be true. In the early 1980s, Aunt May had her, third heart attack? Peter had next to no insurance and needed about $10,000 plus a little bit more to have accommodations made to her home so she could continue to live there. Jameson tells Peter he can't have an advance. There's nothing doing. Robbie starts passing a hat around to collect money. Jameson says he's running a newspaper, not a charity. He steals the hat and tells people to do it on their own time. When they're at work, they're working. Robbie tells him he's being an ass. Jonah says, "No, I'm not. Just drop it, Robbie. Drop it. Now where did I put that directory? I need to make a call." Peter goes to fight some bad guy as Spider-Man. After the fight, he goes to the hospital to work out some sort of payment plan. They tell him not to worry about it. Some anonymous donor called and taken care of everything. Peter never finds out the identity of his benefactor, but we the audience do, with a quick cut back to the stolen hat. It has a check for $20,000 from the Jameson Foundation Charitable Trust. Considering how much of a glory hound he tends to be, it's surprising that Jonah never mentions it to anybody. Ever. Not to Robbie. Not to Peter. He does it because he can. But as this video winds down, I have to address some elephants in the room. As I mentioned before, Jameson seems to accuse Spider-Man of murders he didn't commit on a routine basis. George Stacy, John Jameson, the mysterious body during the Clone Saga. Probably quite a few more I'm forgetting. There's something a lot of people don't take into account here. Until the late 90s, Spider-Man comics had a quasi-omniscient narrator who more or less told us the story from Peter Parker's point of view. So we know Spider-Man isn't the bad guy. J. Jonah Jameson is not She-Hulk or Deadpool. He's not aware of his fictional nature. He can only rely on the evidence he has. That information tells him that Spider-Man was the last person to see George Stacy alive. He was the last person to see John Jameson before he appeared to die in Amazing Spider-Man 190. Given all that, what is the logical conclusion? What is more probable? That Spider-Man is a serial killer, or that he's the unluckiest person alive? No matter how good your evidence is, it can still lead you to a perfectly logical but wrong conclusion. And here is where I run into a problem. There have been times when Jameson, while he hasn't been engaged in out-and-out supervillainy, has at least been supervillain adjacent. The first such incident was in Amazing Spider-Man number 20. He was just starting to maybe come around to the idea that Spider-Man was a hero. But then in issue 18, he failed to show up when his city needed him. This led Jameson to get a big contract to do lectures on why Spider-Man was such a coward, which Spider-Man ruined by coming back in full form. Jameson finds a press release by a scientist who's found a way to infuse the traits of one animal into another. Jameson decides the best way to catch a costume vigilante is with a costume vigilante. So he bribed the scientist to turn Jameson's personal private investigator, Mac Gargan, into the Scorpion to fight Spider-Man. As it turns out, the process isn't perfect. Once the powers transfer, the scientist finds out that some of the animal's aggression goes with it. Not only that, Mac Gargan wasn't exactly a reputable PI to begin with. Jonah finds out about all this a little bit too late. He made two mistakes. The first was trying to rush an experiment conducted on animals to human trials too quickly. That puts him up there with known supervillains Reed Richards, Tony Stark, and Hank McCoy. Second was not vetting his test subject a little better. Once he realizes his mistakes, He is remorseful. He even roots for Spidey and helps clear the area of civilians. Of course, he amps up what role he played in the capture of the Scorpion in the papers, and leaves out the part about creating him in the first place. Now, one could argue that Jameson should have known using that jargon was a bad move. After all, he had only been hiring him to have Peter Parker followed to find out where he got his pictures of Spider-Man. Giving a professional stalker superpowers could only lead to disaster. In the real world, they'd be right. Taking action you know will probably lead to such a result, and doing it anyway is evil. But for literary purposes, we're going to say that there has to be some sort of malicious intent. Yes, he was mad at Spider-Man, but like always, he only wanted him arrested. He didn't want him hurt or killed. This time. After the Scorpion mess, Jameson decides that yes, Spider-Man was a big help today, but that might not hold true tomorrow. After all, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As a twist, he's operating off the same moral principle as Spider-Man himself. With great power comes great responsibility. If the authorities won't handle the Spidey problem, he will. He has the money and the influence to do something about it. This puts him back on the Spidey hate train. Let's jump ahead a few issues. You know, there sure are a lot of mad scientists in New York. This one claims to have invented a robot designed to hunt, capture, and kill dangerous spiders. Jameson commissions him to make one that is bigger and stronger in order to capture, you guessed it, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Again, they start out controlled. But then Jonah takes them into combat. Look at things from his point of view. He sees Spider-Man as a criminal. There is a certain degree of irony there. Jameson comes down hard on Spider-Man for taking the law into his own hands. So what does he do? He hires some nut job to build robots to arrest Spider-Man without any sort of approval from law enforcement. That doesn't make him a supervillain. It makes him a hypocrite. During the fight between Spider-Man and the robots, something goes wrong. Jameson loses control of the Spider Slayers. They start attacking innocent people. Spider-Man has to save everyone. If that's not a big enough insult, this is a mistake Jameson makes at least 2 more times over the years. Some people say 3, but I don't count that last one. He was either mind-controlled or coming off of some sort of post-mind control mania. One final pit stop. This one a little more recent. The Chip Zdarsky run on Spider-Man. Zdarsky is, well, strange and wonderful. Everything of his I've read reminds me a little bit of Steve Gerber, which in my opinion is not a bad thing. By this point, Jameson's father had married Aunt May. This makes Jonah and Peter a weird family of sorts. So when Jameson finds out Spider-Man's secret identity, he does a complete 180. He realizes why Peter had a secret identity. He understood the purpose it served and how much Peter must have sacrificed over the years. He goes from being one of Spider-Man's biggest detractors to being his biggest booster. Hell, he gets dragged around on some of Spider-Man's adventures like a sort of sidekick. Jonah proves himself wrong all those years ago. At least sort of. He's probably right about the I'll never be as good a person as Spider-Man thing, but you don't need powers to be a hero. You just have to make the right choice at the right time. What Jonah was truly worried about was that if he was ever called upon to do something like that, he wouldn't be able to. Hate to break it to you, Jonah, but when you were in that spot, when push came to shove, you did it. I guess what I'm saying is he's done some fucked up shit, but I don't think, at least by the standards of the Marvel Universe, that anything he's done is truly unforgivable. I mean, Gambit and Colossus used to grope teenage girls, and nobody's taken away their superhero union cards. J. Jonah Jameson is not some cackling madman out to destroy the city because no one appreciated his superior glue gun. Which was in fact a real Marvel villain at one point. He wasn't a bad mayor of New York. He's not a knight in shining armor wrapped in the red, white, and blue. He's a complicated, emotionally damaged person who really wants to change the world for the better. He means well. but his understanding of the world is incomplete. This leads him to some pretty poor decision making. But if J. Jonah Jameson is the villain, then guess what? So am I. Chances are, so are you. Who out there hasn't done something incomparably dickish, even to someone they love, either without thinking or because there was no solution? Nobody. Now, I'm not saying each and every one of us is as bad as J. Jonah Jameson, but I think that's about where most of us are. Some are better. Some need quite a push to even get to that level. I know. Some of you are going to call my answer a cop-out. Me, I think it's the whole lesson we can learn from J. Jonah Jameson. The idea of hero and villain are absolutist ideas. Even in the fictional world of comic books, people who are one or the other are few and far between. Most people are somewhere in between. Jameson is about as close to dead center as a character who has been in comics for almost 60 years can be. I'm Jeff Billy, and this has been the Comic Book Corner. I know this is gonna seem awkward, given how I spent 20 minutes talking about how much of a blowhard J. Jonah Jameson is, but it's pitch time. If you liked this video, please hit like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. If you want to support this series, go to my Patreon at patreon.com/ParityErrorFilms. I'm not just raising money for me, but it's to make my videos better. I want to give a huge shout out to John Watkins Chow. I'm going to leave a link to his portfolio so you guys can see it. As you can see, his thumbnails are amazing. If he donated to my Patreon, I'd just be giving him the money back anyway. Be back here next time when our subject will be Superman and the immigration process.